I'd like to welcome everyone to the Nashville Bar Association Town Hall meeting with at-large Councilman Bob Mendes for the Metropolitan Davidson County Metro Council. Bob is a past president of the Nashville Bar Association, and he's also a member of the law firm Sherrard, Rowe, Voigt, and Harbison. Bob, welcome.
Hey, good morning, or I guess afternoon now. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to speak with our members about all of the issues that have arisen in Nashville and across the country and our world because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to get us started by asking you generally to share with us your thoughts about the reopening plan for the city of Nashville and just kind of give us an overview of that plan and any insight you can offer.
Sure, it's been, because nobody's ever done this before, nobody really knows how to turn an economy back on while still fighting a disease. So it's been interesting to watch from the inside the swirl of Vanderbilt, Meharry, metro government, state government, a couple different health departments, all weighing in, trying to find the right balance between minimizing the damage to the economy while still keeping people safe. I would say that where Metro is at right now is there's a sort of a peace with the state government. I think the governor intends for the state to have a minimum set of rules, and the expectation is that Nashville will be more restrictive. The governor and the mayor, I think, are on the same page with that. And so we've got the freedom to deal with our somewhat higher population density here. I think that the mayor is working hard to get the city reopened as quickly as the data supports it. But it continues to be a thing where you decide on a plan this week and knowing that a few weeks later you're going to have to readjust the plan.
And it's my understanding that readjustment kind of started from the beginning, because when we began phase one, we hadn't met every single metric that was anticipated to enter phase one. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely right. You know, when the mayor first announced the plans, they made a big point of saying data, not dates. And then they identified a number one criteria of the 6 that they identified, and that was the rolling 14-day average of cases. And then, frankly, that data point didn't cooperate. And a couple weeks later, they were talking more about it being a balance of all the data, the 6 data points they were looking at, rather than a single most important one. And so, you know, that's not really consistent, but it reflects continued evolving thinking.
And as an at-large councilman, I know that you're in touch with lots of different community groups and business people. And I think we're about a week into our reopening, if I have my dates correct. So how do you think it's going in phase one?
Well, I mean, good on some fronts, difficult on others. I mean, so some places are getting reopened, but I think we find that you can reopen, but does that necessarily mean customers are going to show up, especially downtown? I mean, you can reopen Broadway, but as long as the airport is still down, you know, 95% passengers, there just aren't going to be people there. You know, there's a close eye on the statistics to make sure there's not a spike in illness as the reopening happens. I think tentatively the feeling is that the last week went fine, and there's hope that we continue getting to the next phases in the weeks to come.
As a councilman, and for all the other council members, what is your role in the phased reopening in terms of communications with the mayor's office and the decision-making process?
Well, so technically under state law, it's really not even the mayor that decides. It's the head of the health department is got the formal decision-making power. And what we've seen is when the mayor makes announcements, it's typically followed up with a health department order. And so under the way the law is set up, there is no formal or really informal role for the council in deciding how this works. And if we tried to legislate it, it wouldn't meet with state law. Um, we are getting a lot of communication from the mayor's office and from the health department. And certainly when we've had constituents that have complained about the application of specific rules, it's pretty easy to get a hold of somebody to get specific answers. Schools have had a lot of questions about how to deal with gatherings for graduation, or can sports teams start practicing during the summer. And when those questions arise, it's pretty easy to get a hold of somebody.
You mentioned schools reaching out to you for guidance. What other complaints or thoughts are you hearing from your constituents?
Oh gosh, I mean, people are all over the place. Some people want us to shut it down for all of 2020 and come back in 2021. I've heard a lot of talk about gyms and personal training, because they're pretty shut down. And a lot of people arguing that there could be some quicker opening of those. I've heard places of worship being bothered that the restaurant across the street gets to be half full, but they're only allowed to have 10 people in their big church. I've heard a lot of haircut, barbershop, hair salon complaints. I think it's interesting that a lot of these center around the things that are most personal to us. Personal grooming, religion, wanting to exercise. That's where I hear most of the complaints.
One that I've heard a lot recently, both as a member of an almost 400 home subdivision, is the question about whether or not swimming pools will open this summer. What insight can you give us on that?
None. Buy a membership to a gym in Williamson County is probably your best. I mean, that's a joke, but Williamson County is probably going to have looser rules than Davidson County. More broadly than gyms, there's a lot of questions around how tightly tied day camps and daycare are to getting the economy back on track, both in my law practice and with the council gig. It's clear that it's connected, that a business really can't be fully up to speed until employees can have reliable school or daycare for their kids. And so I think that's become clear to the mayor's office and the health department, is that a linchpin to getting the economy on track is dealing with what are kids going to do during the day.
Now, we haven't seen the end of this pandemic yet, so it may be too soon for hindsight, is 2020. But let me ask you at this stage, what can you tell us about Nashville's preparation for a pandemic like this?
Well, two major categories. One is as a health crisis, and then the other is as a financial matter. As a health crisis, boy, we are so fortunate to have so many high quality medical institutions in town, all over town. Vanderbilt, Meharry have been at the forefront of dealing with this. And we've just got a very high capacity for healthcare in town. And it turns out that the health department had pandemic plans on the shelf in binders that they've been able to implement. So there hasn't been a lot of reinventing the wheel. In a lot of ways, Metro's health response was ahead of the states, and really regionally, I think our stay-at-home order was the first one in the Southeast where a city got ahead of the state, and it's telling that the state government followed along rather than objecting. On the financial front, Nashville has done a poor job of planning for the proverbial rainy day, heading into this crisis. This is literally not an exaggeration. every big city in America, Nashville had the worst rainy day fund of any big city in America, hundreds of millions of dollars behind where we should have been on a rainy day fund. And with us being so heavily reliant on tourism and sales tax, because we don't have income tax in the state of Tennessee, it really, there's a bit of a buzzsaw that's hit the government by having essentially no savings and having our income hit so hard by this.
You've been in the headlines from even before this pandemic talking about the need to raise property taxes in Davidson County. Can you speak to that?
Sure. This is one of the ironic things about being in public office. For clients that pay me to deal with business insolvency, if I was saying the things I've been saying for a few years, getting my hourly rate, the reaction would be, wow, Bob, that's really insightful. Thanks. Let's do it. But when I do it for free in the council, it's deemed a political statement. I've been, I mean, so over half my 4.5-year political career, 3 out of 5 years now, I've been pushing for a property tax increase. That makes me the world's dumbest politician, I guess. And I've only been doing it because it's been screaming off the pages. Even during boom times a couple of years ago, the amount the city was paying for debt service was going up. And that's like a family's having the best, everybody gets a raise, giant Christmas bonus, and the amount you pay toward credit cards goes up. There's something wrong there. And the reality is that the city has forgotten how to set a tax rate meaningfully. For a quarter century, from 80 to 1980 to 2005, the tax rate changed every 3 or 4 years. And now it's only changed once since '05. And it needs to get updated. And again, when I'm wearing my for free hat in the council, that's considered a political statement. If I were getting paid to give the advice, I mean, I know I'm right about it. And the fact that even Mayor Cooper is looking to push the rate up now shows how much we need it.
I know that the financial issues facing Nashville are complicated, but to ask probably too broad or maybe too simple of a question, what rate do you think is appropriate, and how do you justify that to constituents who have concerns about their own financial situation given this pandemic?
Well, I mean, the mayor's proposed increase is probably the low end. I'm not probably, is the low end of what could be done without taking a machete to government services. Any lower than the increase he's proposed, and Metro would have to get out of the business of providing any sort of social services to constituents, or shut down parks for part of a week, or shut down libraries for extra days. And people like to pick arbitrary numbers that they'd be more comfortable if it was a 50-cent increase rather than a $1 increase. But literally to go more than a couple cents lower than the mayor would require just starting to cut off limbs of the government. I believe that's the wrong approach. I believe government should be stable. We will come out of this. Cutting off pieces of the government will be hard to bring back. So I think if you were trying to really help constituents who are going to feel the sting of the rate increase the most, it actually should be set a little bit higher, but definitely not lower than what the mayor has proposed.
It's my understanding that the city has actually received money through the CARES Act. Can you explain to us how much money was received and what is the process for spending that money?
Sure. So the CARES Act, as I think you all know, is a federal relief program. And 4 weeks ago now, every 4 weeks on Wednesday, Metro received $121 million that's sitting in a bank account. None of it's been spent. There are very tight restrictions on what it can be spent on. It has to be spent on virus-related things. It has to be spent by December 30th this year or returned to the federal government. And it can't be an operating budget item. So you can't say, oh, well, let's use that money to pay for our homeless shelter. You can't do that. On the other hand, if you said, in order to deal with the virus, we're going to rent a hotel and have people experiencing homelessness stay in that hotel, that cost of renting the hotel would be reimbursable. So it's difficult to find $121 million of real expenses that aren't in your regular operating budget, and that's the challenge. There's a lot of interest in trying to find ways to spend that money to help people who are going to be most hurt by the property tax rate increase. But so far, whatever process the mayor is going to use to decide how to spend it has not been announced publicly. A couple weeks ago, that was okay. It's starting to get on some people's nerves that we've been sitting on $121 million for 4 weeks. We have to have it spent by December, and there's no known process about how to go about spending it yet.
Is it the mayor's decision how to spend the money, or is there a role for the council in that?
Well, the city will not be able to spend any of it without Metro Council approval. And again, this is where I don't think very many people want a legislative body of 40 wrestling over how to spend money that has a clock on it, where it goes away on December 30th. But we clearly must approve whatever happens. This is why I think it's so urgent that the mayor come up with a transparent, inclusive, and fast process to figure out what to do. If the mayor doesn't come up with a process soon, the council will invent one, and that may not be optimal for us as a city.
Is there any means by which the city can keep the money after December 30th, but say as a low interest loan?
Federal regulations on this keep changing. As of today, that's not an option. And part of the challenge of doing the budget that we were talking about is that has to be done by June 30th. And so a lot of people would like to try to keep the rate lower by, one argument I hear is, well, surely Congress is going to make it so there's funds available for the city. In fact, the House just last week passed something that would make it easier to get funds for the city. And that's absolutely the case, that might happen. But when you're budget building, you can't build a budget around hope or wishes. So my advice to clients in crisis situations is you make the best decision you can for today, this week, this month, and then commit to reassess and change if necessary. I think we ought to do that with the budget. Today, none of the federal funding is available for the operating budget, and so we need to budget with that in mind. And if there's a change, then we reassess, and if we can, before the tax bills go out in October, change the rate if we can.
I'm going to take a quick pause just to let the members of our audience know that if you have a question for Councilman Mendes, if you'll use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask your question, and either send it to me or send it to everyone, and I'll be sure to ask Bob the question. Going back to our budget woes and property tax increase, is there any other way to solve our financial problem other than a property tax hike?
If I have a blog post that you guys could check out at mendesfornashville.com, it's from last week, and I run through the various options that would be out there and the best thinking of them right now. The reality is probably not. The major options we've talked about, manna from DC. Right now, there is no federal relief package that would help us. A lot of people say, well, Bob, the economy tanked in 08 and 09, and the Dean administration decided to refinance a bunch of debt rather than raise the tax rate. What about that, Bob? And the answer to that is that Dean didn't do that in the middle of the crisis when national capital markets were broken. He did that a couple years after the fact. And the city then had enough of a rainy day fund to go the couple years until the refinancing took place. And so right now we've got serious problems with our national capital markets that would make it difficult or impossible to refinance our bond debt, even if we wanted to. So that's not really an option. And a lot of times people will ask me, well, what about raising other fees, taxes, et cetera, hotel, motel taxes? That if you looked at the balance sheet for Metro, you'd see that once you get past property tax and sales tax, you could triple or quadruple every other fee that we have, and it doesn't generate enough money. Most of our revenue comes from property and sales tax. One idea that's out there is taking the machete to the government, saying that there's a lot of waste. But you'd quickly find that you'd kill all affordable housing spending. You'd have to shut some libraries, shut parks, things that would really, I think, nobody would want to do. And then there was one more that people mention all the time. It'll come to me. But I do have a blog post that runs through these just from last week or the week before.
One concern across the country has been the effect of the pandemic on small businesses. What are Metro's concerns about our business community?
Well, I mean, I see that at my law practice as much as I do in the council work. It's not an exaggeration to say that pretty much every day since mid-March, I spend the day talking to small, medium, large businesses about the fallout from this virus. A lot of businesses took advantage of the federal Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loans, but those didn't really solve anything. They just put off Judgment Day instead of having to shut down in mid-March. Those loans are helping businesses push bad decisions into June. And if the economy doesn't come online by the end of June, then a lot of companies that were thinking about maybe having to shut down forever in March will be back to having to think about that. And then it's been well publicized that those PPP loans, it was easier for companies that were a little more sophisticated, had strong banking relationships, strong accounting relationship to apply and get those loans. There's tons of micro and small businesses all over town that really weren't able to move quickly enough to get those loans. And those folks, those are jobs in neighborhoods, and they are holding on, just barely holding on.
We have a question from one of our audience members, I think going back to the budget concerns. The question is, would not a lot of little cuts show some efforts to move towards an overall debt reduction?
Yeah, and that's a fair question, and I'll be a little political in responding. 2 years ago, when I was saying there had to be a 50-cent tax increase, and a year ago when I said there should be a 50-cent tax increase, both years I said that was necessary just to get Metro out of bad habits, really bad habits, and didn't really move the city forward. And the now former mayor aggressively beat up on that concept, saying it was unnecessary, while simultaneously forcing the government to be cutting and cutting and cutting. And over the last 3 fiscal years, going back to Mayor Barry, 3 months before she left office, she started mid-year budget cuts because she knew then that the tax rate was set too low. And Mayor Briley has continued that continued it aggressively for 2 years. And there's been some $40 million worth of cuts over 2.5 years. And for the most part, the Metro government has accomplished those cuts just by leaving open positions unfilled. And so every department already has multiple open positions that they just have left unfilled, and they've made ends meet. All travel is stopped. I don't think anybody would really design a $2 billion government to have nobody traveling to conventions or seminars to learn things. But that was shut down before the virus because the city couldn't manage it. So there should always be cuts. There should always be cuts. We should always be looking for where the waste is. But after being at that for 2.5 years already, since the end of the Berry administration, all the low-hanging fruit's gone, and you could maybe cut the tax rate increase from $1 to 95 cents, 97 cents. It's not like you could cut it a lot by going after a lot of little cuts.
Going back to the small business community and your comment about after June 30th, they're going to have to come back around and make the hard decisions that got delayed because of the CARES Act money that many received. What insight can you give us on the impact on the city of Nashville if we see a large number of small businesses fail?
I think the story for Nashville with macroeconomics is always going to be mixed. For a lot of years, the Nashville experiences not quite as deep of a downturn as the rest of the country, and we tend to come out a little bit sooner than the rest of the country. And so there's definitely going to be pain here, just the way there is everywhere. But it looks like a lot of the big picture statistics you might look at still point in a good direction. For example, in April, the dollar value of the building permits issued by Metro was 90% of what it had been the year before. And frankly, before I heard that statistic, I would have bet that the number would have been a lot lower than that it would have stopped. But construction, the year before was a boom year, and April 2020 building permit issuances were 90% of the year before. I hear from residential real estate agents that, especially for homes $500,000 and less, that there's a ton of activity. The 10,000 people moving here for Amazon are still moving here. There's a lot of reasons to think that the big picture economics for Nashville we're as well situated as any city. But that store on the street corner that you pass by that closes, everybody's still going to feel that pain acutely. And one of the reasons why I think the city government needs to be well funded is if people are hungry, people lose a place to live. The city is the one that's got to provide social services.
I know from conversations you and I have had over the last year or so that there's been some thought that we need more vision in the city for what the future holds. How has this pandemic changed the vision or brought into focus any lack of vision for our city?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's going to be plenty of time for the Monday morning quarterbacking when we get through the crisis situation and things stabilize. I hope one long-term lesson is, I record, but if we had just been average on big city rainy day funds, the city would have had some $650, $700 million worth of rainy day fund. That would have put us average, middle of the pack for the 25 biggest cities in America. And in that context, what a wasted opportunity. the city talks about missing out on some 400 million or so in revenue due to the crisis. If we'd been sitting on a $650 million rainy day fund, middle of the pack, and we ran into that $400 million revenue shortfall, we would absolutely positively not be raising taxes at all, and we'd have resources to invest in people having the hardest times right now. Instead, we're not, and I hope that's a lesson that in boom times you need to save seed corn so you have it to spend when things go south.
Speaking of vision, a lot of our city's political discourse over the last few years has centered on transit. Now we have a lot of our workforce working from home. Do you see a long-term change in our transit needs if employers adopt a work from home model going forward?
You know, that's that unfortunately ends up being a story of the haves and the have-nots. You know, a lot of lawyers, office workers, you know, the ability to work from home, like I'm doing, is a privilege. There are a lot of hospitality industry workers, tourism industry workers that don't have that option, and frankly are facing higher health risks than I will by working from my house as the economy tries to turn back on. And you know, for families that are maybe lost one job and somebody else has to go to work in the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, etc. You know, public transit could be the difference between being able to go to work and not. And so I think for a lot of people, the transit is more important now than ever. But it's going to be interesting to see how the conversation is impacted once the dust settles on this.
I want to take another moment to remind our audience members, if anyone has a question for Councilman Mendes, if you'll pose the question to me or to everyone through the chat function, I'll be able to pass it along to him. This is an election year. What can you tell us about issues that we are facing with elections in our city, including any issues with people wanting absentee ballots to avoid the risks of COVID-19?
Well, I tell you, that CARES Act money, that $121 million sitting in the bank right now, one thing I really would like to see us do is to have a campaign to help absolutely anybody who qualifies for an absentee ballot for the August election or the November election to be able to make it really turnkey easy to make sure they know they're eligible. Reach out to them, tell them they're eligible, and see whether we can get that to happen. One of the categories in Tennessee of eligible vote by mail is anybody over the age of 60 for any reason that happens to match up with an at-risk group for COVID-19. So if I got to call the shots, some of that 121 million would be used to reach out to every registered voter over the age of 60 to make sure for both elections to make sure they have an easy way to sign up for voting by mail. It would take the state to act to broaden absentee voting by mail beyond the current levels. I'm not optimistic that they'll do that, so I don't put a lot of energy into thinking about it. It's going to be hard. You know, another thing Metro could do is to make the hours for early voting longer to try to shepherd more people to early vote where the crowds are smaller. So that's, I know it's still a work in progress trying to figure out how to make sure we get as many people to vote as possible.
You are a full-time lawyer at Sherrard and Rowe and a part-time employee of the Metro Council. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges for you in your dual roles during this time.
Yeah, the thing that always comes to mind is that with being a lawyer, you always have to keep all the balls in the air. And if any of them hit the ground, then you might be committing malpractice. And in politics, it's the opposite. You can never keep all. You can't do it all. You can't get to everything. And so trying to have one side of my brain working where it's just do as much as you can do, and whatever happens happens. And then switching to the no, in the law practice we must do everything. That's always interesting. And then this year it's crazy. For 25 years I've been doing the corporate insolvency work, and the city's finance director, Kevin Crumbo, he's an accountant by training, but comes from the restructuring world. And Kevin and I have been friends for 20 years, working on cases with each other, against each other. I've hired him, he's hired me, I've cross-examined him. It's kind of weird that two insolvency professionals are the city's finance chair and the city's finance director, all at the same time. I don't think we would prefer not to be exercising that skill set right now, but we are. And then the law practice, it's been slammed with how bad the economy is getting. And it's like getting ready for a trial. I'm working, 16 hours a day, and then we'll get past the budget season and I can focus more on practicing law as usual.
Technology has been key to industry and courts and government getting through this pandemic. Can you talk to us about how the Metro Council is utilizing technology right now?
Yeah, I think we're doing as well as we can. The city is using WebEx instead of Zoom, and it's got all the same functionality that the other platforms do. So that's going okay, but it's slower to have to do everything on a conference call. We're used to being in the chamber together where we can chat on the side to try to find compromises, and there's no we're allowed by law to have those chats on the council floor. We're not allowed to have non-public deliberations, say by text message. So it does slow it down. And then as far as the budget process goes, one thing that's not solved yet is how to have a good public hearing all remote. The Planning Commission has figured out where they accept comments in advance, and you can leave recordings of a voice comment, and they've got a mechanism where you can call in live. But without the body language and reading how people are responding, it's just a much more two-dimensional experience than if we were all live in a room together. So we're doing it, but it feels more flat and slower for sure.
And does technology, or maybe even, I guess I should put it as lack of access to technology, does that affect members of our community? And is there anything that can be done with that $121 million to help bridge those gaps?
Well, another use of the 121 that I've advocated for is the city knows where our lowest income, most marginalized communities are. And I would definitely, I've advocated that the city should take some of that money and buy the best Wi-Fi blasting equipment that can be purchased today, and stick it on top of every school and publicly owned building, park building, library building in our lowest income neighborhoods, because not being able to participate in the electronic experience is definitely a hindrance for a lot of folks right now. We also, just with the people, a lot of people don't like the size of the Metro Council, but it is a representative body. And we can see, even with the 40 of us that are in the council, there's a wide variety of ability to access this sort of electronic meeting from home. Some people have either due to experience with the technology or living in a place that doesn't have great internet access, which there are places in the county like that. Um, we definitely see some.
We had a tornado in early March, and then the pandemic really hit the city of Nashville. What challenges has that presented for the city, for tornado victims, and for getting through this?
Well, for tornado victims, I mean, I think everybody knows by now that, you know, the tornado went on a straight line on the ground from Tune Airport straight through North Nashville, all the way out to the county line in Hermitage, and there are more than a few communities on that path that that struggle to begin with, and those are a lot of the same communities being hit hardest by unemployment from the virus, and you know, I hear a lot from those parts of town, and we're trying our best to try to get social services. A lot of the money that's been raised through the community foundation is going back into those communities to help people who are struggling to, you know, have a place to live and food to eat. It's definitely an issue, and then it's you know, it's really inspiring to see Metro employees, you know, whether it's public works, fire, police, EMT, really lots of departments inside the Metro government are there. As I mentioned before, they've already are all across the board understaffed because they've left position opens to make the quote unquote belt tightening budgets work of the last couple of years. And then when bad things happen, like, they work as hard as it takes to make the city work again. And there's a lot of departments in the Metro government that are taxed to full extent, men and women out working hard every day that really could use a few weeks off, but you know, they're not going to get that, and they put a smile on and go to work, which is really impressive.
What can lawyers be doing to help our city get through this time?
Well, I'm really, you know, some of the programs that the Bar Association is doing, both to help with Legal Aid Society and having us volunteer time individually there, and then the National Bar Association is teaming up to provide free advice for small businesses. That sort of stuff matters a lot because there's almost unlimited need for people trying to figure out, like, what do I do? I think all of us, you know, even legal professionals, at one point or another, probably a lot of points over the last few months, have sat down and really had to take a moment and try to figure out how does this work for my family, my immediate family, my extended family, for my church, for the nonprofits I care about, for my clients. I think a lot of us have had just one stressful conversation after another that we really don't know the answer to the questions. And being there for the community is important. I do think it's real important for lawyers to remember to take care of their own mental health during this time, because we need to have ourselves in a stable place in order to help others. It's a thing as a profession, you know, we all know that we struggle with, but especially now when so many people are bringing so many stressful questions to us, it's easy to start sliding toward being unhealthy yourself. And so that's a good place to start.
Have there been any silver linings in this time, or anything that you've been particularly grateful for?
I mean, on a personal level, I've got two teenagers, a junior, senior in high school, and we've had more family dinners together over the last couple months than we had probably for the 5 years before that combined. That's my kids. I don't know if my kids love it, but my wife and I have enjoyed that. I mean, it's hard to find silver linings. I mean, the closest I've got is I'm pretty convinced that Nashville is better situated than almost any big city. We've got this hurdle of trying to make up for not having changed the tax rate hardly this century. I mean, that's a hurdle. That's a real problem. But the fundamentals of the city are still stronger than most, and we probably wouldn't swap our problems for many other cities' problems. So that's a good thing.
I saw on your social media that you got to officiate a wedding during this pandemic. Tell us about how that went?
Yeah, I actually did another one on Saturday, so it's been two now. You know, my family was supposed to go to South Carolina for a niece's wedding in April, and like a lot of other travel and weddings, it got called off. And there's a lot of people. It's spring. It's the time of love and renewal. People want to get married. People with weddings that were scheduled. Um, a lot of them want to go ahead and, even if they can't have the big family party, go ahead and actually get legally married, and then hold a ceremony with friends and family, hopefully in the fall. And so there have been two couples so far that same story. They had a wedding date scheduled for months and months and months, and it had to cancel the party, but they wanted to go ahead and make it official. And it is maybe the coolest thing I get to do as a council person, is I've got the legal authority to marry people. So twice now. This last on Saturday, it was when people want to do that, I'm very flexible. Like wherever they want to go to do it, a park, wherever they want to go, I'm happy to accommodate, because it's a nice thing to be able to do. And they insisted they would just do it in my driveway, so they got married in my driveway.
So now you've got a wedding venue.
Right.
No.
Right. I was the photographer also.
Well, now we know you have something else to do if the law gig and the councilman gig
Right.
work out. Do you have any parting thoughts for our audience? Anything that you think is important to share with everyone?
You know, the thing I keep thinking about for whether it's my kid wanting to start college out of town in the fall, or our law firm trying to figure out, I'm on Sherrard and Rose committee to deal with COVID-19. So how to get going as back in the office. We're doing fine remotely, but sooner or later we have to get back to the office, or Metro, or clients. I keep coming back to the same thing. The advice of a pretty decent plan today, executed with confidence, is better than hemming and hawing, looking for the perfect plan that may never come along. And so I keep, I mean, at least for me, the way I'm keeping my head above water is I can control the next week, the next month, the next couple months for me, my family, clients, law firm. And I'm not getting too bogged down on what next January is going to look like. I'm going to focus on the next couple months, make the best decisions, reassess, do it again.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for everything that you do on the Metro Council, for our city, and as a member of our legal community, and for making time today to be with all of us.
No problem. Thanks very much, Laura.
We appreciate it. And this will bring our town hall meeting to a close. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.